In this episode, we speak with Sami Inkinen, the founder and CEO of Virta Health. Virta is an online specialty medical clinic that reverses type 2 diabetes safely and sustainably without the risks, costs, or side effects of medications or surgery. Created in 2014, Virta's innovations in nutritional biochemistry, data science, digital tools, and clinical expertise are shifting the diabetes treatment paradigm from management to reversal. Before Virta, Sami was a co-founder of the leading online real estate marketplace, Trulia. He also previously worked for top companies including Microsoft, McKinsey, and Nokia. Sami is also an endurance athlete. Sami and his wife rode from California to Hawaii, 2,750 miles completely unsupported. He is also a triathlon age group world champion, an 8-hour 24-minute Ironman with 7 Hawaii Ironman finishes. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the managing partner of GrowthCap and the executive chairman of Market Insight Media. He is the host of Growth Investor, a podcast featuring today's best investors, executives, and founders. In the minutes ahead, we'll uncover insights and strategies for accelerating growth and succeeding in business.
Sami, great to be with you. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for inviting.
Super interesting background. Obviously, what pops out is the rowing adventure you went on to cross the Pacific. Was it from Hawaii to California?
Actually, it sounds even better when I say from California to Hawaii. So it was the opposite direction. So
Okay.
California to Hawaii, yes.
And that is an incredible physical feat. Did you have confidence that you'd be able to do it? Are you a rower? Is that in your background?
Well, first of all, for those who don't know, you're referencing to a rowing adventure me and my wife did from California to Hawaii. So we ended up rowing 2,700 nautical miles, 45 days completely unsupported, across the Pacific Ocean. So it was a little crazy. So to answer your question, zero rowing background, absolutely zero rowing background. So basically went from 0 to 60 miles an hour, if you will, in 6 months. So in 6 months, physically and logistically, we prepared for that. But I would say the hardest part is kind of the same as for starting a company, which is it's easy to talk, but once you take the first step, literally the first step, in this case, the first oar stroke, you really kind of have no way turning back. So it's interesting that, yeah, it's kind of hard to get through and, 45 days and whatnot, but actually the hardest is the first step or the first oar stroke, because once you've taken that, you really have no choice. You're just going.
Well, we'll continue the parallels with building a company and how challenging it is. On that journey, on that rowing journey, what were some of the most kind of surprising things that you learned, maybe about yourself, about maybe your relationship with your wife, about endurance, like all of it? Like, what were the kind of the key things that you learned?
Quite a few things. I'll mention a couple like truly transformative things, I would say. Well, number one was we decided to start a family. In other words, have kids. And, now we have 6 and 8-year-old daughters, and it's more or less 8 or 9 years since we came off the boat. So that was one, the realization that there's a lot of things you can do in life as a human. And I had been very lucky, I had built Trulia, which had gone public and coincidentally merged with Zillow for multiple billions of dollars while we were rowing. But in any case, it really hit kind of viscerally that, wow, the greatest thing you can do, I believe, as a human or experience is raise another human or child. So that was one. The second one was, I call it's sort of like my mantra, get uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is the entire row, it was about 1 million oar strokes, 1 million oar strokes from California to Hawaii. And it was 1 million uncomfortable oar strokes. Like there wasn't like instant gratification, any kind of sort of pure joy in taking those oar strokes. But it's moderately relatively uncomfortable. And I realized through that experience that the periods in my life when I've been somewhat uncomfortable have actually been the most gratifying periods in my life. And so specifically, actually, I was debating whether I want to start another company I wanted to start the current company that I'm running, Virta Health, which is solving diabetes and obesity. But I was a little hesitant after Trulia 10 years, like, oh my God, it's so hard. But this get uncomfortable really hit me. And I realized that our minds kind of gravitate towards comfort, warmth, and food and whatever. But that's not how you live, at least in my opinion, gratifying life. So that get uncomfortable is another one that I really learned through the role.
Well, we'll dive into Virta Health. Before we do that, when did you decide to focus your professional life and maybe also your personal life on healthy living and healthy living companies?
Well, there's sort of two parallel tracks to that, I would say. So my kind of training and background is I studied physics and got into computers early. So I would say my professional tool in my back pocket has always been software and technology. And I've used that to try to solve problems for the benefit of other people throughout my career, starting from, I don't know, age 15, running a BBS, bulletin board system in Finland. But the healthy living, there's sort of two dimensions to that, or two parallel tracks. One is that I grew up on a farm, and so there's a lot of manual labor. You know, I was a cross-country skier growing up, and so sort of sports and taking care of your body as a side product of manual labor that I had to do, or the sports, has always been part of my life. So that's sort of one track. So I've been either an athlete or wannabe athlete and focused on, you know, staying in shape and taking care of myself, both physically and mentally, my entire life. So that's kind of one part of it. But then maybe I'll briefly mention kind of what led me to come out of Trulia, an online real estate marketplace, and using software to, you know, basically build an internet company and help people find their dream home. How I came from that to specifically healthcare, which I've been in now for about 10 years here in the US. So that was very accidental. So like I mentioned, I've been an athlete all my life in 2000s, 2010. And so did a lot of triathlons and even won the world championships in triathlon in my age group, 2011. So it was very, very kind of fit and healthy. And so I always thought this huge problem of metabolic health, diabetes, and obesity, which is touching sadly billions of people and more than half of American adults, it's kind of like, it's not my problem. It's let's be honest, it's willpower. People eat themselves into sickness. What can I do about that? So that was my thinking until I discovered that I was pre-diabetic myself and on my way to type 2 diabetes, despite all this exercise. So that got me, honestly, selfishly, initially very interested in, wait a second, maybe there's something we don't understand about metabolic health and nutrition. And then eventually when I discovered that, yeah, in fact, the way we look at metabolic health and nutrition is kind of upside down or backwards. And if you know how to use nutrition, you can actually effortlessly cure many of these diseases that are considered chronic and progressive, such as type 2 diabetes. So that was the second parallel track. And I said, wait a second, this is insane. I think there's a way to actually solve the problem that millions of people, including myself, tend to think is unsolvable or personal choice. And that kind of pulled me into healthcare. And I felt like my skills and my background and my experience in technology could help to solve this metabolic health crisis. So those were the two parallel tracks. And now I kind of live and breathe either healthcare or wellness or fitness pretty much all the time.
Well, it's a dramatic change from going from the real estate market to, you know, health tech, or even further into the science of the human body. Tell us about that journey. Was it easy to switch into that, kind of use the frameworks you had for building a company from Trulia and kind of figure out how to leverage those frameworks with Virta? And then you brought in investors. How challenging or not challenging was that?
Well, it's yes and no. First, Trulia, the online real estate marketplace, or you can call it real estate internet site that I co-founded with Pete Flint. There's a lot of parallels in that I knew nothing about real estate starting Trulia, and my co-founder knew nothing. In fact, this is funny enough, both of us co-founded, me and my co-founder Pete Flint, we were physicists by training from Europe, had started a tech company before, but we were immigrants fresh off the boat to America, had never started to build a company here, and more or less knew nothing about residential real estate in the US. Yet, you know, we were able to build this company that still, I think, has tens of millions of users every month in America now, 2024. So there's actually parallels. So when I entered healthcare and started Virta Health, it's the same thing. I had never built a business in US healthcare. I was a consumer. Well, actually, I wasn't even a consumer of US healthcare because I'm basically so healthy that I more or less never go to a doctor. So there were a lot of parallels to the Trulia story in that sense. And so I wasn't afraid by the fact that maybe I don't know how the ecosystem works. Maybe I don't know the individuals. Maybe I don't know the companies. Well, I didn't know in real estate either. But I will say two or three things that can be beneficial going into a new. One is you are naive enough, as long as you're humble, you have humility, but you're naive enough that you don't know how hard it's going to be. I think that's a benefit. And then you look at these problems with sort of fresh pair of eyes. So that's actually a benefit coming from outside. And the cliche most entrepreneurs say, I would have said that with Trulia and Virta is, oh my God, now that I've been 8-9 years in this, had I known all the craziness we have to go through, I would never have started. And it's actually true. So that's kind of one benefit in coming into a new industry and how you can come into a new industry. The second one is I always say, but don't be stupid. If you don't know anything about the industry, surround yourself with experts and you listen to them very, very, very carefully. We did that with Trulia. Same now in healthcare. You listen to them very, very carefully. But then you have to be able to selectively ignore. Because if you just replicate the past ways of doing things, obviously you aren't going to change anything. And then the third one, I will say, in the case of Virta Health, the science of reversing type 2 diabetes, the science of sustainably delivering weight loss nutritionally for years, that did not come from me. I was lucky enough that I stumbled or found two amazing clinician scientists who had been doing research in this area for actually several decades, who then became my co-founders. So obviously there are things, if you're not a healthcare or clinical expert, you can't just whip up new biochemistry that you've never studied. So I was lucky that I was able to start the company with real domain experts as well.
You know, it's interesting, earlier in the conversation, you talk about a focus on being uncomfortable because that's where maybe better human experience comes from, is like going through those tough times. But it seems like you're consistently exposing yourself to uncomfortable situations. Is it something you still focus on? Like it feels like your baseline is much higher than others for kind of pursuing the uncomfortable.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe it sounds like masochistic. Why don't you just sit on a beach and be a consumer 24/7 and eat good food and read newspapers all day long? Well, let me tell you, that's just not life worth living, in my opinion. And you can try it for a day or 5 days or 2 weeks. I just don't find it gratifying. So I like to say that, again, being uncomfortable, it's kind of like standing on an edge and leaning forward, but you don't want to lean too much forward that it becomes masochistic and you fall down. But yeah, absolutely. I find that whether it's, I think everyone who's a parent, you're kind of a little uncomfortable. It's not easy raising children, and sometimes there's hard stuff. We have kids not to change diapers, but sometimes we have to change diapers. That's part of raising a child. Same in business. You kind of have to be a little bit uncomfortable, especially in a growth company, which is never like status quo or maintaining. You always try to grow, and even trying to survive actually for a growth company keeps you uncomfortable. So it's not that I'm seeking to hurt myself. I just find that it's to create something or try to even help other people, whether that's through a business or, raising a child. You kind of have to put yourself into a position where a little bit uncomfortable. So I kind of seek those experiences, quite honestly.
And what's the current vision that you kind of hold in your mind that you're aiming to achieve?
In general in life or for professionally with like Virta Health?
I guess both.
Okay. Well, Virta Health, it's very easy to explain. So our specific mission is to reverse type 2 diabetes in 100 million people. But even more broadly, metabolic health, particularly type 2 diabetes and obesity, it is touching more than half of adults in developed nations, more than 150 million American adults and billions globally. Like it is a huge, massive problem. Economically, it's leading in diabetes case, amputations, blindness, death. It's just ridiculously sad. We have to solve it, this metabolic health mess. And the best that humanity has offered to date is bunch of pharmaceutical companies very successfully selling drugs to treat symptoms, of type 2 diabetes, obesity, rather than actually making people healthy. So the broad vision for Virta Health is to build the lifestyle treatment version of these pharmaceutical companies that actually reverses the disease and makes people healthy. And it is possible with combination of nutrition and technology. So that's the broad vision for Virta. I wish I could snap fingers and this quarter solve the problem, but I honestly think it's a 20, 30-year journey to be able to do that. So that's the broader vision for Virta. For me personally, I just want to make most out of the minutes, seconds, months, years that I might have on this planet. And it just falls into a couple of things. One is using my creativity and skills to help improve other people's lives. And obviously I do that professionally. And then it's kind of friends, family, and children. And so those are the couple of main areas that I allocate time. And then of course I want to keep good care of myself, both physically and mentally, to be able to do those. But I look at life pretty simplistically. It's a miracle we're here and we try to make most out of the time.
Now, delving into Virta Health and the organization itself, how do you think about the culture, building the culture? Do you have a philosophy about what you want your organization to feel like for the people working there? And then I'd like to ask you later about how you hire. But let's
Yeah.
talk about culture first.
Yeah, 100%. We got lucky that at Trulia, we thought of culture and values early and weren't quite sure if it's like, is that really what we should be doing? We got very lucky we did that. And so I've been very, very conscious at Virta as well. And let me explain the reasons. Number one reason is that founders actually don't have a choice whether a company will have its own unique DNA and sort of culture and values. It will happen. It will 100% happen. The only choice you have as a founder is, do you consciously direct into a direction you want, or do you let it sort of organically and randomly appear? And of course, the former is always better. Why wouldn't you be strategic? Why would you just kind of let it emerge? And then if it's not supporting your business or you don't even like the culture and values yourself, it's horrible. So that's the number one point. Like, actually, founders don't have a choice. Are we going to have a culture and values? Of course you're going to have, but you have a choice whether you want to consciously guide it to the direction you want. And to me, it's a no-brainer. Of course you want to do that. So that's one. You want to focus on this. That's the number one reason. The second reason I think is very important is you have to be able to make dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of people be able to work together in some sort of a consistent manner to the same direction. Obviously, strategy and mission can guide the direction. But there's not that many ways to do that. One is that you have a massive rule book of 5,000 pages that explain every decision and what to do and what not to do. I hate that. I don't want to have that. So values are very helpful. You say, here's the mission, here's the direction. And by the way, here's a couple of values. This is kind of how we operate. And then you hire smart people and you trust them and let them go. So I find that values is potentially a very scalable way to make a large group of people, hundreds of thousands of people, kind of work together in a consistent way. So it's very, very, very scalable. And most founders, I would say, they want to set their own path. So they don't want to create 5,000 page rule books like some government organizations may have. So those are the reasons why I'm a huge believer that you do want to pay attention to it early. And I think that's founders' job to define a few values and then define some practices that allow you and the rest of the team to actually live up to them. And if they don't, like, how do you kind of push them towards that? And so I paid a lot of attention to that at Virta.
And then to the hiring piece, are there certain qualities when you immediately see them in a person, you know they're going to be a good hire? It may not work out, but they're at least going to be a good hire.
Yeah, well, first I should say, like, oh my God, hiring is so hard. It is so hard. People have tried to write books and analyze and this and that. And, you know, everyone has their own, like, what's your favorite interview question? This, I'm very humble about the fact that, you know, I don't know, my hiring success rate personally, probably, I don't know if it's 50%, 60%, 70%, but it is so hard. And my experience is mostly in companies less than 1,000 employees. And so you could call them startups or growth companies or whatnot, not necessarily running a 100,000 employee company, which I've never done. And so I think of it always like from a growth company perspective. So there are a few things that I really look for. One is what I call a Renaissance people. And what I mean by that is I would love to find people who in one single brain, they can do three things: a decision maker, then the execution operating, and then sort of setting up the tools. Because in most large companies, to do the simplest task, you need three people to do all those three things. You have the manager who makes the decision, Then you have the software engineer, the IT person who kind of sets up the tools, so sets up some systems. And then there's a third person who's actually cranking the cranks, doing the job. That drives me crazy. It is so slow. And so I always try to, even if you're like a VP or director, and like, I hope that you have some skills to like, I don't know, set up tools yourself or set up some macros and stuff and software. And then when the time is right, you're in on the 5-foot level, actually doing the job yourself. So that's one. I call them Renaissance people. And oh my God, it is a 10x speed difference when you find those people. So that's one characteristic that I look for. The second one is I do look for sort of founder entrepreneurial mentality for growth companies, which is that you never get stuck. You always find a way. And I think one of the founder's superpower has to be breaking chicken and egg problems, because everything's a chicken and egg problem. When you start, like I don't have a prototype, so I can't raise money. And if I don't have money, I can't hire people who can build the prototype or whatever. Basically, there's always a chicken and egg problem and always an insurmountable obstacle, particularly for founders, but for everyone in a growth company. And I can't stand people who just get stuck. They're like, well, I can't do X because I don't have Y. It's like, no shit. That's your job to figure out how to do X without Y, or go and borrow the Y from a friend or whatnot. So I think those are a couple of the characteristics. It's more like mindsets, and if there's past track record, if people have been able to show that. So anyways, those are mine. But I'm very humble about the fact that hiring is freaking hard.
Mm-hmm. Curious, speaking of this kind of values and directing the culture, do you find that you're always thinking about how you present yourself to the organization, or are you just authentically you all the time?
It's actually both. I think authenticity is 100% key. And by the way, I do think the values to a large extent have to reflect the founder, because if your values aren't kind of align how you see the world and how you want to run a company, you need to fake it every day, and that's just not going to work. So I do think authenticity is key, like 100% key. But people mistake authenticity as like, bring yourself to work and everything that's in your head. Like, no. My job as a founder and CEO, one of my jobs is to manage the energy of the team. And if I have a horrible day, say at home with my kids or whatever, I haven't slept, or I'm like pissed, I don't want to bring that. I have to fake, to some extent, positive energy. And now I may open up in a smaller executive session, like, oh my God, like today is not the day for me to make hard decisions. I hope you all understand I have a tough day or whatnot. But I think people mistake authenticity as like, oh, you bring whatever has happened to be in your head and what's your energy level. No. Especially as a senior leader, you manage the energy of the team. You manage their optimism. And so I am very conscious of those things. And especially in a startup, I like to think that you want to be ruthlessly honest about the short-term reality and facts, but you also want to be unwaveringly optimistic about the long-term future, not either or. If you fake the short-term realities and you don't talk about the facts and ground in reality, then everyone's sort of disillusioned and you live in a bubble. Like if you're running out of cash, or if your customer is leaving, or this top part of the product's not working, whatever it is, like, okay, we need to fix this. This is real. Let's face the facts. But then you combine that with the founder optimism that there's always a way. This is the vision. We are going to get there. So that's one example of, I guess, bringing authenticity, but then also being strategic with what do you tell, this yin and yang of ruthlessly honest about the reality and the facts, particularly the things that aren't working, but then consistently optimistic about the long-term future.
Excellent. I know we're approaching the tail end of the conversation. I have two that I like to end with, two questions. But before I ask that, I'm curious, are you remote or hybrid or in person?
Well, first of all, I am a believer that you only want to innovate in the sort of IP and product and go to market, and copy paste the rest, including how to run a company, how to set up an organization. You don't want to innovate in like how to run a company, because thousands of companies have done that for hundreds of years, and tech companies for several decades. So I'm a believer on sort of copy pasting the best practices. And to answer your question specifically, I think the hybrid would describe the working setup best. We have two strong offices, Denver, Colorado headquarters, San Francisco, another strong office. And then, 1/3 of folks, including my executive team, largely is all over the country. And then we come together periodically. And then people who are near offices use it as much as they can or as much as they want. So I think the hybrid word probably would describe currently the best.
Great. Last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
Oh, there's many. I would put my wife very, very high up there. Obviously, we rode across the Pacific, and we've also co-founded a company briefly together, and we've worked together in actually at Virta as well. I also have sort of a virtual imaginary board of directors of historic characters that I always try to think, what would so-and-so do? And then I'll throw one more name. Our lead independent director, Greg Waldorf, on my board has been very helpful on my entrepreneurial journey. He joined our board at Trulia, I guess around 2005. So we are at 2024 now. So 19-year professional relationship. He invested into Trulia, was on the board for a decade or so. And now almost the same time, not quite, on the board of Virta. It is very rare that you have that sort of a tight, trusted professional relationship for that long, and it's been invaluable.
Last question, and this might be a little bit of a redundant topic, but can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
I love harnessing the capitalistic system for positive change, because I believe that the for-profit capitalistic system is one of the best sort of human process innovations, system innovations. And so this may sound kind of dull or self-serving, but Virta Health and trying to reverse type 2 diabetes and help people solve obesity globally, and using this capitalistic model, and our business model is such that we only get paid if we succeed with a patient, is what I'm most excited about. And I'm basically putting all my professional energies into that. And the fact that you have a for-profit company doesn't mean that, it can't be pure. Like, that's not the purest form of trying to do good in the world. I think it can be. In fact, it can be the best engine, because you can find capital, you can attract talent. And then if you have the right business model, things just keep going and delivering goodness. So I'll say Virta Health, although that might self-serving.
I think that's a wonderful answer. And I, in some regards, share the same philosophy. Well, Sami, want to thank you again for taking the time. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.